Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live, coming to you every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Every Tuesday, we do pitch decks. Wednesdays, which is today when we're recording this, we do traction hacking and growth, getting customers, revenue accelerator, all that good stuff. That's what we're going to talk about. And then Thursdays, we do open Q&A. And we've got my main man, Ryan, here, Chief Marketing Officer for Startups.com, multi-time founder, been doing this for umpteen years. I always say, Ryan, every time I describe you, that you have forgotten more about digital marketing, customer acquisition than I'll ever know. And let me just tell everyone the story here, all right? I remember, I think it was one of the first times we met in person, and we were talking in the hotel, and I said, hey, are you reading any books? And you told me you're reading a book about cold email. And you seem so fascinated and ready to dive into the book. And I thought, man, this guy's in the right spot. Better him than me. He's such a nerd reading a book. Who reads books on cold email, Ryan?
Oh, I mean, I think it was a reasonably well-sold book. So me and probably at least a couple thousand other people. Well, it was bought. Who knows? You know, a lot of books are bought and not read. But I thought you were just making jokes about my recent soccer concussions. I managed to do it to myself again last week. I knocked myself dizzy again. So I think I'm going to have to cut the career short here relatively soon. My wife finds out about this one. She's going to cut me off for sure.
Hey, everyone, we are very open to talk about what we're all about, all our extracurricular activities. But really, the reason we're here today is to talk about the Revenue Accelerator. And we broke this down into helping you, all of you out there, with your first 10K, your next 10K, and then 10X your 10K. That's the situation that you're in. I want to remind you all, use the Q&A box or chat to ask questions. So we'd love to hear from you, what your startup is, what you are selling. That way, we can customize this conversation to you and throw out some nuggets out there, answer some questions. We want to prioritize those questions there. Ryan, if I had to twist your rubber arm and say, give us the one secret that we can do to become masters at customer acquisition. I know I'm putting you on the spot, Ryan, but if I had to say, hey, what's the one thing, what would it be?
Easy. Know your customers. Know your customers. Know your customers and know your customers the way they know themselves, right? I think it all comes down to really having crystal clear understanding of what their problems are, how they feel about those problems, how they feel about the desire of having the solution. When we know the people that we want to serve at that level, talking to them becomes super, super simple, right? Because we know the language they're using. We know what keeps them up at night. We know what gets them up in the morning. And we can start to participate in that. I think when we're just trying to communicate at people instead of with people, it becomes a real problem. And the only way we can communicate with people is to have some common ground, some understanding of where they're coming from. So dig in and get to know those folks.
But Ryan, that seems like such a no-brainer. And you're repeating that.
And yet.
Exactly. You're repeating it over and over again. I'll tell you, Stars, having this exchange with my good friends on Reddit. Shout out to everyone on Reddit. I love you all, kind of. It's been a complicated relationship with me and Reddit, but I was having
a love-hate relationship.
Exactly.
We love Reddit and it hates us for some reason. I can't
exactly. And a founder asked me and says to me, why can't I just start a subreddit and have people come and sign up and then I'll pitch them my solution? And I said to this founder, I said, because nobody gets up in the morning and says, oh, you know what I really want right now? Yeah. I want someone to just pitch me their stuff, right?
Pitch me in the face. Yeah, it's what everybody wants.
And I repeated everything that you would say, like, you want conversations, not conversions, just get in there and all those things. And he says to me, but Ed, as a consumer, I really want the ability to be able to see the solution out there and pick. And he was justifying, rationalizing his approach. And I said to him, sure, you are taking for granted that they're already there wanting that. And I began thinking, and I thought about you, and I said, if this is such a no-brainer, Ryan, my question is, in all your experience, why don't founders actually implement what you just said in knowing your customer? What goes through their minds to stop them from taking that very obvious common sense route?
Yeah, a lot of things, but the main one is that they get caught up in building the solution. They know, they're like, the customer exists. Clearly they're out there and they need me and they want me, and yes, I'll just take that for granted. Because the hard thing, the thing I have to go figure out is how to build this thing that will solve their problem, right? The challenge becomes they forget to go deep enough on the problem, they forget to go deep enough on the audience that they want to serve, and they get caught up in the solution. I mean, Ed, how often do we see this? Certainly more often than the opposite, which is that we've got somebody with a solution who's out hunting a problem.
Exactly.
Right? This is exactly why this starts. And look, your headspace is going to be largely occupied at some stage with the thing you got to go build. But before we go and build it, we've got to make sure that we're building something that somebody real, not our imaginary friends, not our mom, actually wants, unless your mother is the target market, then fine. We've got to make sure that there's actually something that's gonna bounce off the public. Now, what that founder said isn't wrong. There are people who are out there and want to compare things and want to buy things. Those are great. Those are a very tiny portion of the population, probably relatively well aligned with what might be their early adopters, assuming that their differentiating factor is exactly what's missing from whatever that early adopter has already been doing, right? But that's always going to be a tiny segment of the market. And we have to be careful to build for a broader market, but to market to the early adopters early on. But we want to make sure that we're not only building a market for the 10 hungry people that are out there. It's hard to build a business off that.
I think a common mistake, Ryan, is founders sell to themselves. And so because they're building the solution, they think it's amazing. And they say, well, I'd buy it. Of course you'd buy it. You're selling to an audience of one. You're monologuing to that echo chamber in your head. Yes. And so you take for granted that not everybody's going to think about you. And you don't go talk to a live human being. I wanted to share, and this is for all of you out there who are going to be listening to this. One of my hobbies, so Ryan has soccer, so we're going to let him, and that's, it's up for debate right now whether Ryan's going to continue, but it's he clearly loves it. I have been
losing the internal debate, but the external debate's the one that's going to be harder.
Just be safe and stay married is the important thing. But I write fantasy novels, Ryan. That's something that I've been pursuing as habit. And one of the pieces of advice they say is write what you want to read first. Like get out there and literally write for yourself, which I found incredibly helpful as a fantasy author. However, it's the exact opposite in startups. Don't do that, everyone. That's how it's related.
Because a lot of people are building fantasy startups. So if you want to build a fantasy startup, lives just in your head and on paper and maybe some Google Docs and never makes it to the light of the day or never makes it to the market, then absolutely do that. Look, there are times where we can lean on our own experiences or expertise as a founder. If we've lived in that space and it's truly we're solving a problem that we experienced often enough as a founder, we can begin there, right? We can begin there, but that doesn't mean that we can use ourselves as a single data point and then build everything based on that, right? What's the first rule of building? We need a direction. And what's the rule of having a line? You need at least 2 data points, right? You gotta have at least 2 points to draw a line. If you're drawing a line from 1 point, are we drawing in the right direction? No one will know till it's too late.
That's a great way to look at it. I actually have never thought about using that illustration of the line. We've got a great question from the audience. We love it when the audience participates, but I'm going to set it up and segue with this. When we're talking about your first 10K, you can look at it in 3 segments. This is what we talked about, Ryan. You've got pre-product, even though your approach is going to be generally the same as you've shared. Pre-product, so you can actually sell before your product actually gets out there.
You should.
Then you've got your 10K that you can make when you launch your product, which is just the standard, what everybody thinks. It's similar to the question that we got from chat. And then we have founders all the time that are stuck post-product. They built something and it's just not selling. So what do we do? Here's a question for you, Ryan. This will get us warmed up. A founder says, I'm pretty much finished my first MVP minus payments and have 3 potential customers, kudos, who are willing to test the MVP and give me feedback. The product is a B2B SaaS for commercial real estate investors and brokers to find properties and meet their needs in terms of municipal zoning. It is designed to fit between existing solutions and word of mouth. I intend to pivot the product according to the feedback from the 3 people. Always good to be open. Where do I go from here?
You go to market probably, but I guess it depends on what the feedback from the 3 folks at the MVP stage is. More so, one of the things I would want to know is how did we derive this product in the first place? Was this our imaginings? Did we go out here? You know what I'm going to do now, Ed? I'm going to hold up my Bible here, the mom test. Did we go and talk to customers? Did we interview customers? Did we understand the specific challenges that real estate investors and brokers have when they're trying to find properties, right? And how much of an issue is zoning for them, right? All of these things. Presumably this has been done. I'm going to assume this has already been done. Yeah, so one of the things I'd be curious about is to understand what makes us think we're going to get something that would qualify as pivotable data based off of 3 data points. I'd be a little concerned that we're going to pivot product based on 3 users. Doesn't sound like a lot to me unless there's some really market feedback or something that we missed during the customer interview process. So I guess from a where do I go from here standpoint, let's just assume that all of that happens to plan, right? That we built the product that the market wanted more or less. We're going to MVP it with 3 players. So here's a pro tip. As you get those folks into that MVP and they begin to use it, don't simply observe casually. Have a plan for the story you want to be able to tell when they are done, because these should be feedback, but what else should this be? This should be testimonial. This should be referral. There should be success stories, whether they want their names attached to it or not. There should be some outcomes from this that were positive. The challenge that I always run into with founders is that they go looking for these things after the fact. They conduct some experiments and then they look backwards and go, okay, now what can we make out of it? Instead of saying, here's what we'd like to be able to tell at the end of this. Here's the story we'd like to be able to tell. Here's how much faster the search was. Here's how much quicker the deal landed. Here's how much happier the brokers were, how much less resource they had to apply to get to the point of doing diligence on a deal and closing a deal. Whatever those pain points are, I'm making stuff up right now. But we want to be able to illustrate that to the next 3 users and the next 30 users and the next 300 users, the next 3,000 users. So as you're going through this MVP, don't leave it up for chance that story gets told. Make sure that you construct the engagement with these folks in a way that builds the constituent pieces of those stories from now, and you will be a much happier founder 2-3 months from now when this pilot wraps up.
Okay, I appreciate you saying that because I never would have even gone there. That's why you're the expert, and we're having you talk the most.
I have just made all these mistakes and then looked back with deep regret.
Okay. So. But kudos to this founder. Let's get granular here. The chat says, yes, this product was conceptualized by listening to their problems in interviews. Fantastic. Biggest pain point was zoning. Fantastic. We're taking for granted that that's the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, Ryan, I want to backtrack here. All right. So let's walk through this scenario. They listen, they built it, and now they have 3 potential customers said, I'm willing to test the MVP and give feedback, which I really like. So when this founder is going to go contact them, how does this founder set that up to get that story or to make sure that we don't have false positives? We're using principles from the mom test. Walk us through how you would couch that test.
Sure. So I guess we always want to start with what are we trying to validate, right? So for me, MVP is about validation. I think some people think it's like, can we just stand up a product? That's not what you're trying to do with an MVP. You're trying to validate some of your core assumptions, all right? So presumably at this point, based on the information we have, one of the assumptions that we're probably trying to validate is that we make it easier to find those things, right? So that truly we make it easier to find properties that align with the zoning needs of a particular client, deal, whatever it is that's happening. So we want to make sure that we have visibility on that, right? So we're going to want to understand a couple things before people come in, like how long does this usually take you? How much time do you usually spend on this? Right. So again, we got to have some sort of a metric. We got to have. Are we looking for a pass fail here? Are we just looking for qualitative data? Is there quantitative data to be had? Things like time, money spent, or deals lost because we weren't able to find something properly zoned. What is so zoning? While I understand that zoning was the pain point identified, zoning isn't actually the pain point, right? It's one of the hurdles, one of the blockers. Pain point is presumably lost time, lost money, lost deals, something else. So what's the thing behind the thing?
Like the friction.
And what are we validating on the back end? So what is the value provision, right? And so this is something, it's amazing to me, but again, I did this many times before I figured out how to get it right. One of the things the MVP should be trying to do is validate value. Oftentimes what we're trying to do is validate, will people pay for it? Well, that tells us you built a good marketing trap, but if there's no value provided after the fact, what have we built? Not a business, right? Not one that will continue. Are we trying to validate product features? Okay, stuff works, but we don't need clients to do that. You can do usability testing in a lot of ways to make sure that stuff doesn't break. So that's not really it either. What we should be trying to validate is value. If the clients come in, use this B2B SaaS as intended, does it provide them with the transformation or outcome that they expected? Which means one thing for certain, we got to make sure, what is that expectation? What are they wanting to get from this? And sometimes that gets missed as well.
Okay, I want to highlight that. I'm going to tell you a story, Ryan, because I just went through this.
I like stories.
Yeah.
Is this a fantasy story or is this a real story? Now I'm going to wonder every single time.
It has to do with fantasy writing. Thank you very much for asking and paying attention. Ryan, I love you. Okay, so I have this problem as a fantasy author with beta readers. A founder out there knew I had this problem, contacted me and said, I create an MVP to solve your problem of getting beta readers for your fantasy novel. And I said, fantastic. And I said, I'll test the MVP. They sent it to me and they just sent it to me and they just say log in. And I look at it and I got to tell you, it was so messy. There's so many buttons and so many different things to do that I just got lost. I didn't know what I was testing or validating. I didn't even know if this solved my problem. Like it just had everything in there. And I literally had to go back to the founder because I'm an advisor and I want to help the founder, right? Most customers aren't even going to do this, right?
Nope. You will never hear from them again.
Yes. So I went back and I said, I'm very confused. What exactly am I testing? What do you want to know? What insight, what data point do you need from me? And they gave me that thing. And the other issue was it's so hard to even get to that. And they just said, I just want to know if you can do this. And I said, thank you for simplifying that for me. And you could have made the MVP just straightforward, but I understand founders get that way, right? So that's my story in terms of they could have done a better job in getting that story from me.
Yeah, it's exactly. You want to make sure that you're teeing them up for success with the platform, both in terms of understanding of how to use it, what the expectations are, what they should be trying to do, and is it truly just a test? Right? Is there something specific you want them to test, or is it just sort of like, I want you to just go use this and let's see if we get to value? And again, don't leave that up to chance. Like, I would say I'd be staying really close in terms of usage with these folks. I would play the role of the success manager with these first three if I'm the founder. I would be in there helping them understand how to use it, seeing where it goes right, seeing where it goes wrong. We talked about this before, but looking at simple behavioral analytics and sort of like whatever touch points and push buttons are, leaves a lot to be desired, right? Like if that founder had sat and watched you try to navigate that MVP, imagine how much they would have learned as they saw like the look of concern go across your face, the where the hell do I go next, the what do I click, what do they even want me to do, right? All of a sudden you learn a ton. Just a caveat to all of that, that was a miss on the part of that founder, in my opinion, because there should have been some basic usability testing done.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be conducted by an actual client. It's a waste of a client interaction, in my opinion. Make sure that somebody, with some level of, they don't have to have the same knowledge that your user has, but you're talking about stuff, Ed, that was just basic SaaS usage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? You're talking about stuff that was just like, it's hygiene factor table stakes at this point, right? If people can't figure out the path or they weren't told the path, that's a problem. Figure that stuff out first before you put live fire clients into an exercise.
That's right. And I'll just be very honest. I'm not as motivated anymore because there's already friction put in, right? So you don't want to lose that. Now, Ryan, this is my next question to you because I've seen two things occur. One, it's like what I experienced. Here's the MVP. I want you to know if you can do this. See you later. Have fun. Let me know later. I'll follow up with you in a week. Then there's I want to watch you go through it and I'll be a voice on your shoulder and say, okay, see that button, push it, and then do this, and then do that. And I've been part of that where I've been micromanaged to that. What's the best way to approach them actually testing once you let them know your objective?
Let's split the difference between those 2 points. We don't want to just leave them on their own. We also don't want to micromanage them. Maybe, unless that's what they want or need. So I think it will depend a little bit on the objective and the outcome. If this SaaS is relatively straightforward and very, very focused, especially for the MVP, and it should be, right? So if we're just trying to validate a single point of value, which is, can we help them better identify the zoning requirements or the zoning types prior to further evaluation of the deal so they don't end up evaluating deals that can't be done, then we need to provide them enough support that they can get through that. Remind yourself that this is an MVP. So I'm definitely not as concerned with like usability. Now I'm concerned with basic usability.
Sure.
But we're not looking for like, is the workflow completely streamlined and perfect? And is the UX clean and polished and all that? I want to understand, did we make it simple enough for them to jump through whatever the hoops they have to jump through? And did they get the cookie at the end? Right? Were they able to navigate the course and get the prize? So were they able to get properly zoned locations that they can then move forward with the deal? So again, it's gonna depend a bit on what exactly you're trying to validate as to how much hand-holding needs to be done.
Perfect.
But the hand-holding is less about the tool and more about the acquisition of value for the user. We want to make sure that we are there to support them through getting the value. We have all the time in the world to iterate on the product, add features, add buttons, remove buttons, change colors, do all that stuff. None of it matters if they go and do the things that we told them to do. They get to the outcome and they go, well, I jumped through the hoops. I got the cookie. This cookie kind of sucks, right? That's the problem. That's the first thing that needs to be addressed. I see so many people end up like they're belling and whistling and they're honing and polishing on a thing that no one actually cares about the outcome from. So we got to get them to the outcome, make sure they're really excited about that.
Sometimes the founder tells you you're going to get a chocolate chip cookie at the end of this. You're super excited, and then you end up with oatmeal, and you're just like, what is this? So
wait, was it an oatmeal cookie or just oatmeal?
Well, a half-baked oatmeal cookie, you might as well put in a bowl, okay?
Yeah, okay.
But
that's I don't want that.
Now, here's how I like to do it, Ryan. I like to take it from assumptions. So if I've built an MVP, I say, my assumption is that a user is going to come in and see the green button, press it, and then because they want, plug in all the factors for the chocolate chip cookie, and then they can actually say, yeah, you gave me a chocolate chip cookie at the end of this. And I'm prepared for the bad news. If it doesn't happen, that's fine. But that leads to the next question. And I'm just asking on behalf of this founder, like, founder, I hope you're okay with me asking all the questions I'd be asking, right? And I struggled through. So Ryan, after the test, how then do you get that information to determine whether you do need to pivot or improve or everything's hunky-dory? How do you get that information?
Sure. Well, I think you set the stage. So if this is truly, because this sounds like there are people waiting to provide feedback, right? This isn't just like kind of three random customers. These are people that they've sort of teed up as kind of a friendly test, let's say. So we want to make sure that they understand what those rules of engagement are up front, and that they will be providing feedback. And here's what I want you watching out for. Here's what we're trying to achieve. And then you're just going to go back and you're going to talk to them again. You're gonna mom test it again. You're going to ask some of the same questions that led you to build this thing in the first place, and find out, were those pain points soothed? Was the desired objective achieved? And was it achieved in a way that was comfortable to the user, feels like it provided ROI, whether that's on time or money or outcome, right? It depends, again, on like what the blocker was, right? When we talked about this, but the zoning isn't the issue. Zoning blocking a deal is an issue. So were deals blocked previously from getting done, did a deal now get done because we properly selected something with the right zoning, right? I'm making up the scenario here, of course. Like the founder's probably giggling right now, listening to me. Like, that has nothing to do with this, right? But just for purpose of illustration, this is what we want to know. I want to go back to something that you said, Ed, which is around the assumptions piece.
Yeah.
And this is what I was driving at a bit earlier around, we want to be validating something. Right? So we're validating an assumption. One of the things that I see get missed with the MVPs a lot is, what are we actually validating? We pick the wrong question sometimes, and so we end up with the wrong data, and we start to make the wrong decisions based on that. It is really important to consider what you're trying to validate. I always try to start with the things that are like the binary go, no-go gates, right? So for example, if you use this tool to find deals with proper zoning, and that's the outcome that you need, and you don't find any, right? That's a problem. Like, for example, like, oh, well, we're unable to actually normally source a deal for people. That's a big problem, because you can't build a business around one that can't provide the actual solution, right? So, or is it, can we provide them in a timely manner? Can we provide them in an accurate manner? What is it we're trying to validate that would make the business either work or not work, right? Sometimes it's about, will people even ever pay for this? Or is this just a nice to have, right? So if we're worried about that, we might want to work out how we can get people to pay for some version of this, whether it's a service or a product or something early on, if payment becomes the big binary gateway that keeps us from being able to move forward, right? I've talked to founders who, when I looked at their products, I was like, I'm pretty sure that you're trying to violate physics here. So let's make sure that we can do this before we move forward with the business. Because if you can't figure out how to actually make this thing do, then the rest of it doesn't matter, right? If there's going to be something that will completely hamstring the business or kill it, that's a really good thing to validate as early as you can.
I'm going to ask you to repeat a lot of the great nuggets, because I'm trying to lay it out for the founder here. Let's just set it up that the assumption is a user's going to go click the green button, enter some stuff, and get some zoning or whatever the outcome it is, either validated or invalidated. And walk me through, Ryan, the two scenarios. One, it gets invalidated. What do you do?
Sure.
And just lay it out. And then the next one, which I really liked what you said, thinking about the next three users, et cetera. Let's say it does get validated. It works. Hooray, huzzah.
Yeah.
Now what do you do?
We turn that into evidence. So let's start with the first one. So if we're trying to validate something, like the first thing that you laid out was actually a technical validation. We don't need customers for that, right? We don't necessarily need customers for that. We would need customers for a qualitative piece of that, and I'll explain what I mean. So if I go in and someone should be able, for my team, should be able to go in, click the button, specify the needs of the project, hit go, and get some results. Now, as a technical team, we should be able to see, did it actually produce results? Were they accurate? That's great. We don't need a customer to validate that.
Great.
Where we might need a layer of customer validation on that simple outcome is, do those feel like reasonable results? Would they meet my needs? That's something that as a tech team we can't actually say.
Do they have value in the wild, in a real
Correct.
scenario?
Right. If I look at those and I go, yeah, okay, those all meet the zoning requirements, but they're all in the wrong parts of town, or the prices are wrong, whatever it is, right? So that might tell you, okay, so we need some more filtration criteria. We need to give people better ability to green zone and red zone areas within the map, so that they're only pulling deals that they would actually consider based on their specific location. Maybe it's not just a zip code or a radius. Maybe we actually need to be able to like redline certain areas and say like, okay, we don't want anything in that district, we don't want anything here. You start to learn from that, right? So the qualitative feedback at that level would be important, right? Because again, if we keep producing results, this is exactly goes back to value provision. If we keep producing technical results, it puts out 10 choices for me every time, but none of those 10 choices are good for me as the user based on my internal criteria. Not the things that I could specify on the screen and pick the buttons and then hit go. When it comes down to now, I need to go do the deal, whatever the nuanced pieces are. So then, to your question, what do we do with that feedback? It depends. Is there a technical solution for that, right? Or are we up against something where it's like, no matter how good of a list we deliver based on the criteria that are available to us, based on the things that we can use, publicly discoverable data, privately discoverable data, whatever we're using to derive these results, can we get to a level that's good enough to satisfy the user? If not, that's one of those binary go, no go gates. We have to go, well, we were not able to technically solve the challenge for our users. Back to drawing board. We're either going to scrap the project or we're going to go solve a different kind of problem because we can't do this. In the case where it was validated, we want to move on to that one?
Well, I want to just point out something that you said triggered this thought. Sometimes, Ryan, we trip over things we didn't know. Like we put it out there, and
sometimes.
Like I've had users go in and try and do some really weird things I never even imagined. Or suddenly everyone goes, this seemed like such a great idea, but what we didn't know was this was a factor. There's a nuance that nobody predicted. And then you're just kind of like, oh my goodness, like either I've been barking up the wrong tree, but you're also really grateful to get that insight. And that could be a result of the process exactly as you're describing.
Yeah, so it comes down to some really fine detailed nuance, right? Like in this case, let's just say it's something like it's surfacing really cool buildings, but all of them, and let's say that we're looking for something that could be zoned for a child education center, okay? Cool, brings up 10 results. All 10 of them happen to be within 2 storefronts of a liquor store, a gun shop, or a smoke shop.
Sure.
And there, ergo, the client won't say yes to it, so it doesn't work for me. And that's nuance that we wouldn't have been able to see as we're thinking about the criteria. Maybe we can even specify that. So this is the kind of thing where at the end of the day, it has to deliver a result. The user has to be able to take the result and derive value from it, right? So the specifics of that are very complicated, right? But the understanding of that simple 3-part mechanism is quite easy, I think.
Okay, so now scenario B, which I hope happens for this founder.
Yes.
Validation, yay. What's next?
What's next? So we take the validation. We try to understand, was there anything that could still have been improved, right? Did they say, this was great, but we had to look through 20 offerings to get to the 10 that we actually needed. Okay, so we could do some additional filtration, or maybe we deliver smaller lists, or maybe they said, look, we actually had to run 2 or 3 queries to get all that we wanted. It'd be nice if we could combine those. So there's almost always, very rare that we just get pure validation. It's almost always yes, but, or yes, and, right? Like, okay, we got what we wanted, but here's some nuance. So we'll want to act on any of the nuance. We'll want to talk to them and understand, like, what else could we have improved? You don't want to miss those opportunities, right? Even if they say, yes, this worked, great. But the bigger piece here is we want to capture that momentum. We want to capture that value and really start to try to quantify it and qualify it in a way that speaks to those next 3 users and then the next 30, the next 300, right? So it is now saying we went from taking 5 hours to conduct zoning searches to 5 minutes. We went from 3 weeks to find appropriately sign off on a deal that was able to move then to close, right? Whatever those target goals are, the big things, and again, this should map back to these conversations that you had during the customer interviews, and it should map back to the problems that they had, because those problems should map to the rest of the user's problems, right? So this is where we get to go into that lovely reversal of, again, we have problem and solution, where we show the problem was here, then it was completely reversed, and now we're in better condition. We want to go tell that story in a real way to subsequent users. So it's just about now packaging the stories, again, using their language, putting them in the places where they hang out, right? So now we're just straight into marketing, right? But we're going to use this as one of the pieces of communication.
And you're saying you literally go out and tell the next 3 customers, hey, your colleagues over here used it this way, this result, here's their testimonial, here's their case study. Like, you are that upfront with that.
Yeah. It does not need to be more complicated than that. In fact, it shouldn't be, because this is what most people are looking for, right? When we go to buy something, of course we want the transformation. What are we trying to avoid? Wasting time, wasting money, looking foolish, right? And so if we can see somebody else who looks a lot like us, who did this thing already, who got the result we wanted and avoided the things that we want to avoid, we feel that much more comfortable. So we're simultaneously lowering all of the barriers to purchase. Analytical, financial, emotional, psychological, just makes it that much easier for the next person to say yes.
Let me offer a pro tip for those of you out there, because I know I see you in the audience. If you're raising money, here's how we bring these 2 worlds together.
Yeah.
I heard from an investor one time. He said, Ed, I normally don't invest in pre-seed, but I invest in this one. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So what happened? He said, during the pitch, gave me the pitch, and it was a B2B SaaS. And he said, I have called and talked to 1,000 customers. Potential customers. And he was like, that's crazy that you can even go get that. And then by the end, the founder didn't even ask for money, said, don't take my word for it. Here are the names and numbers of these fancy logos and these people who've already tested it and who will give me a reference. Call them first. And I thought, wow, that is awesome. And that just kind of lines up with what you're talking about is don't just set up for the next 300, but the next 3 investors, the next 30 investment presentations that you do, they all can work together.
This is why it's so important to think about, again, that story that you want to tell. So if the next important story you need to tell is to investors, make sure that you're capturing information that will be compelling to them. Think about the story that they need to hear and the way that they need to hear it. The way that founder did it was very clever. Sometimes that might work. Depends on the type of product that you're building and selling. But clearly they did all the things that we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
They sort of knew the story they wanted to tell. They clearly validated the value, right? They were able to validate value because that is what the customers will be willing to talk about, right? They're going to say, here's what happened to us, right? We used to be like this, then we use this, now we're this much better, right? And that's the story that they're going to tell that investor and be willing to share.
Furthermore, he had those customers agreeing to the price point and how they were going to purchase it even before the product was made. Like I'm talking pre-product, pre-seed, right? Man, when we say investors invest in founders, we're not kidding. Like you show that rocket fuel in your veins, you show that relentless resourcefulness, that passion, that conviction, investors are going to pay attention, and that's the key. So, hey, founder out there who sent us this, I hope it answered your questions. Really appreciate you allowing us to beat that up because it allows us to share with everybody else. We got to thanks, guys. That's great. Feel free for those of you in the audience, but I want to continue on here and maybe spark a few other questions because we talked about all the different stages and make sure everybody, if you have a Q&A or a question, go in the Q&A box or the chat. Feel free to do so. So Ryan, when you say your next 10K, find out what works and repeat it. I'm going to assume, let's use this founder as an example. Like they went out and did the hand-to-hand combat. We beat up founder-led sales, direct sales a lot. And then you said, find your next 10K, find out what works and repeat it. Just summarize for us again, how do we go about finding out what works to even, repeat that? Just give a thumbnail.
Sure. So the last time what we were really talking about was how we kick this process off. So understanding how we get to that first 10K. And the core points there were sell before you build, right? So let's go out. And if it needs to be a service proxy or consulting or information product before we go build the product, do that, right? So it's all about selling before you build. It's about starting with your network so that you're not starting cold. Work with the people that you already know. Reach out to them, right? Those 1,000 founders or those 1,000 customers that founder called, I would be willing to bet my hat that I'm not wearing right now that they started with people that they knew. It wasn't that they just cold called 1,000 people. They started with people they knew and they built outward in concentric circles. Okay, so you don't need this. Who do you know that might need this? Who else should I be talking to and doing that, working that? And then by going direct, right, and just talking directly to the customers. Don't try to do some fancy inbound strategy. Don't try to run ads at the early stages. Just go talk to people. Skip the website, skip automation, all the marketing fluff, just go talk to people and sell. That's how we get to that first 10K. And that's how we then start to repeat what works. So within that process, right, of doing all of those things, we are going to learn a ton. By the time we've sold 10K being a placeholder, right? If you're selling $50,000 consulting engagements, then clearly you're going to need to sell more than 50K to get some learnings. In most cases, you may find that you learn a lot by the first sale. Depends on the complexity of the sale and the complexity of the market, all that stuff. So what worked to get you to the first 10K, right? What was the pattern of communication? What were the objections that most likely led to, right? Because I think this is something else that's funny. People don't realize this, but the objections are the pathway to sale.
Right. Yep.
Sometimes people start to try to avoid the objections. Like, well, how do I find people that don't have those objections? Wrong answer. Find out how to solve those objections and get people to buy anyways, and then go find people with those objections. That's far easier to do. It's way easier to find people who object to something. Right? It's far easier to find people with problems. So we can use that to our advantage. And then it's about identifying those patterns, right? Based on those objections that we handled, based on the type of business, size of business, number of employees, problems that they stated, things that they cared about the most, what patterns emerged from that first 10K that we can start to repeat and build into a system?
Let me interrupt for a moment. And this goes to your point, document what's already working. So make sure that you're documenting all the way through those conversations. That's going to be your friend. But I wanted to bring up a really interesting question because, again, I was talking to a founder about this. And they said, Ed, that's great. I sold my first 10K, but I'm having this huge problem. The person I sold it to or the client, this was a B2B, they're becoming a nightmare. Like they are literally, like they paid, they don't want to give up the revenue and they're being promised, oh, this client is very connected, could refer us. But now they're questioning whether it actually worked. And this goes back to your point that, and I repeated exactly what you said. You give me a lot of ammunition to advise founders. I appreciate you. I said, sometimes the yes, even if it leads to that 10K, is the wrong yes.
Oh, yeah.
The question is, how do you know? Like, you're desperate for revenue, Ryan. Like, how do you know if it's actually working or you're just hoping and somehow trying to squeeze a round peg through a square hole?
If we're at one sale, we can't really do much, right? And we may have absolutely needed that revenue. There are times where we just kind of have to take the money, right? What we don't want to do is keep saying the wrong yes. We covered this a couple sessions ago where we talked about what the right yes, the wrong yes, the right no, the wrong no in terms of founder-led sales. And so we got to go back to those principles and really think about what does it mean to say yes to the wrong person or to get a yes from the wrong person. And whether we're in a position where we can say no to that. Sometimes the cash is worth the trouble, right? Rarely long term. I think this is one of the things we discussed. We don't want it to become a pattern. We don't want it to become a habit that we take the wrong money. But at early stages, if you haven't sold anybody and you've got somebody that's going to come in and be your very first client, one, I would argue it's probably fairly hard to know whether they're right or wrong. So again, this is going to go back to just what I just said. Look for the patterns. Identify the pattern. What was it about that customer that you start to see signs of in other people that you're talking to now that give you that feeling? And it's a bit of a spidey sense in the beginning, honestly. It's sort of like, ooh, I'm getting client 2449 vibes, right? Which we don't want to repeat that person again. Right? I'm serializing them to protect the innocent or the guilty in this case, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking for those patterns, right? Those are important. I would argue in the beginning, let's focus on first spotting the patterns that lead to the yes, and then looking for the patterns that help us to determine whether it's a good yes or a bad yes.
That's actually really good to break it down. I want to share a story. You just sparked a story just for everybody out there. I had a startup, and to spoiler alert, we'll start with the end. The startup ended up getting acquired. It was one of my exits. So it was successful. But when I was first standing it up, I had someone contact me, and they were part of a company, and it was $1 billion company, and they were interested. They were 3 hours away from me, and I drove literally a dozen times back and forth to try and close that sale. Now, the bigger the elephant I was hunting, the longer the cycle takes, right?
Sure.
So I said, I'm going to put it in there. They kept humming and hawing and saying, oh, but we really need this feature. Can you do this? Can you do that? And the power dynamics start to creep in.
Yep.
And then you know what happened, Ryan? I got into an accident driving back and forth on the highway, totaled my vehicle, and my co-founder slammed his head into the window so hard he lost his hearing temporarily, right?
Oh my goodness.
And I got to the point, Ryan, where I said, this is not worth it. I said, you know what? They're just throwing their weight around at this moment in time because they know they can. And so I'm going to turn the tables. I'm going to say, I'm going to make you need me more than I need you. And I revamped. And I think I did what you said. I really broke it down. I said, what's my ICP? Let's go to smaller ones. And let me break down why I got into this mess in the first place. And then I adjusted, and then the sales started coming. And I've been working with other really big companies since, but in the beginning phases, it was a combination of looking at the data, 12 trips, my gut, how I felt about it, and I just had to make a judgment call on how to get my next 10K.
I think it's interesting that it very frequently, there's sort of two versions of this. We're not sure if it's worth it, and we're sure it's not worth it. Those tend to be the two flavors of this thing. If you're not sure if it's worth it and you're still relatively early stage, and you don't have something else that is clearly more productive to do with your time, chase it, follow it. Do it. If you get to a point where you are sure it's not worth it, right? Co-founder's head bounces off windshield, car is totaled, you've wasted, a month of your life driving in a car. Call it what it is, right? Learn from that too, and maybe say like, hey, there's a funny thing about hunters. Most of them don't start by aiming at elephants.
Yeah.
Right? They start with significantly smaller prey and then work their way up. I guess it doesn't have to be that way. There are arguments for, just saying like, well, we're just going to start with enterprise together. I see it work out so rarely. I would rather work on things. So this is one of those questions of efficiency versus efficacy, right? It can be very efficient to land a big client, theoretically, right? Because we do one sale and we get a lot more money, super efficient. Only had to talk to one person, and usually a lot of decision makers within a larger company. But
one invoice, it works, yeah.
One invoice, right? So you get one invoice, you get a lot of money, super efficient. The problem is that when you get into everything that it takes to do that, there are a lot of inefficiencies, right? The driving back and forth, the dealing with lots of product requests that are well outside the roadmap, and you're just doing this to try to satisfy someone. There's all kinds of other things get introduced. Whereas a smaller, simpler sale may not be as efficient from a cash generation standpoint, but it's far more effective and far more repeatable. So for me, it's always about which one is going to allow me to build volume faster. Would I rather push one giant rock up a hill, or would I rather carry one small rock over and over and over? At which point am I accumulating more rock at the top of my hill? That's what I'm going to do, because at the early stage of a startup, momentum is far more important than a singular large outcome. If we can get to 100K in two ways, through 10 clients, where we believe we can move faster to get those 10, or they're easier to get, or whatever that is, the velocity will be faster, be higher there than getting one client at 100K I go for the 10-10 every single time because I appreciate velocity and momentum.
Not just you, but everybody out there, take a wild guess what the investor is going to want to hear more. What is the better story? And investors are really scared when you have all your eggs in one basket.
But Ed, look at how sweet I look with this safari outfit and my giant elephant gun. It's sweet. We haven't found any elephants yet, but look at how sweet I look chasing it. I don't look sweet chasing it? Yeah, nobody cares.
It's just investors are savvy to all that. But Ryan, I love it that you basically just naturally segued us to the last topic. And I just want to touch on this. You often say we end up trying to scale all the wrong things. So you want to optimize first. God. So I love this statement, Ryan, because this is like the mindset you need to be in, because eventually all startups, you have to be thinking 10x. You need to be scaling. But walk us through, what is the mindset of optimize before scaling?
Yeah, so look, we want to make sure that we're pouring gas on a fire that's worth building, number one, and that it's the right fire, the right time, that we can capture all the energy from it. So very frequently, this, again, it goes back to efficiency versus efficacy. I see people try to scale things. They don't understand whether they're effective or not. And so you can very easily scale things that are ineffective. I do it all the time with marketing spend, right? It happens. We start with something, we're like, okay, now we want to try to scale the spend. And if you don't spend enough time getting it right at the beginning, right? If spending $1,000 isn't returning a result, spending $10,000 is going to return 10 more not results. We don't need that, right?
Yeah.
Inefficiency scales way faster and way easier than efficiency does, or than effectiveness does, because we don't have to work to find it. We just get to do the thing where we step on the gas, right? But if we step on the gas and we're not sure we're pointing in the right direction, what are we actually doing, right? So if we go back to the two things that we should have done at this point, which is to get to our first 10K, we went out, we did all the things, right? We did the things that don't scale, right? People like to say that now, I guess. We did the things that didn't scale. We just went direct. We worked with our network. We sold before we built. Then we started to look at that and say, okay, how do we turn that into a repeatable system? How can we start to understand the patterns of communication that lead to a sale, the types of people who are more likely to buy, and then start to sort out some of that good no, good yes, all that fun stuff. Then we start to automate some of those repeatable parts. Right? Once we realize we're doing the same thing over and over and over again, we can automate it, we can delegate it, right? This is how we all of a sudden go from, because going from 10K, first 10K to second 10K is truly just a repetition.
Right.
Right? Yep. Nothing much has to change. We can probably get there faster, we can be more efficient in doing it, but we're going to do essentially the same things to get there with a little less wastage. We want to go from 10K to 10X 10K, or 10X whatever your number is. Things have to change. At that point, we have to be thinking, how do we expand that sales engine, right? What does that look like? We've got product market fit now, or we should have some semblance of product market fit at this point. So this is when we really start to build out sales and marketing, right? You heard me say earlier, ignore marketing, ignore funnels, ignore advertising, ignore all that stuff in the beginning stages. Now, this is where we have to start to do that. So this is where we start to automate the repeatable parts. And automate might be a word that gets bandied about right now in ways that is not exactly what I'm intending. So I would say if I've been delivering messaging one-on-one to a founder, if I've been doing direct outreach, one of the ways I can automate that is with advertising. I don't mean just automate a process. I mean automate the outcome.
Because you know the message to put into advertising because it's working.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. So that we can do that at more scale, with more rapidity, with more repeatability, better reach, right? So it's at that stage that we have to start to do things a little bit differently while maintaining as much of those core principles, the things that we learned. I think one of the things that ends up happening is that people start to try to do completely different things. They're like, well, this got us to 10K, but to get to 100K, we have to do something completely different. It's iterative, right? You want to take what worked at each stage and start to figure out how to multiply it by some scalar number.
Yeah, don't start a new fire. Pour gasoline on the one that's already working.
The one that's working.
That's accelerating. And I just want to try and repeat and pull out the principles because I really like the way that you couch it. 10K to your next 10K is you repeat once. 10Xing your 10K is not repeat 10 times. That's not what we're talking about. And that's not going to work for investors either because they need to see that exponential, that hockey stick growth graph that everybody covets. So it's like, okay, if I went and I put in $1, and I was able to get out $1 back, and that's linear. So now if I put in $2, I'm going to get $2 back my next 10K. I'm just oversimplifying everything. Yep. But now we're talking about the mindset is, if I have learned all my lessons and the principles, and I have optimized everything, I should be able to put in $1 and know how to get $10 out of that by, either automations or finding some leverage, unique insights, or your product is mature, you've got that momentum. That's what you're talking about in terms of that's the 10X mindset.
Correct. So let me break it down in just a slightly different way.
Please.
I'm thinking through this as I talk, so bear with me. That first 10K, we're just figuring out how to get to 10K at any level. The second 10K, essentially what we're trying to do is to do that again, but to do it with more efficiency. So let's just, for fun's sake, let's say the next 10K, We want to be able to do it 10x as fast.
Gotcha.
Right. So we want to repeat it, but we don't want it to take the same amount of time, because then all we're doing, we're just linear growth. Now we're a 10K business. That's not what we're trying to do. That's not growth. That's just continuity.
Gotcha.
Right? So if we're trying to grow, one of two things has to change. Either we got to go from, if we did 10K in the first period, let's just call it a month. It's probably not, but let's just pretend, just for ease of illustration here. 10K in the first month. To be growing, get our next 10K, that 10K needs to happen in the first week, or it needs to be 20K or 30K or 40K in the second month. That's growth. If we just do 10K and then we do another 10K, that's not growth. That's just repetition, right? So let's pretend we got 10K the first time. The next 10K, let's say we do it twice as fast. We don't have to do, well, no, let's continue to use our base 10 math here. We do it in a tenth the time. We learned so much in that first 10K that we're able to cut out all the bad language that we're using. We're able to just focus on the right type of prospects. And this is what we're driving towards. It clearly probably doesn't happen 10K the next 10K, but this is what we're aiming for. We get 10x more efficient. Okay, cool. But now, in order to grow again, the same magnitude, we have to be able to do 10x as much of that in the same time period. So this is where the systems, the automations, the scalability come in. So to get to a 10x mindset, you first have to figure out what works. Then you have to be able to repeat it, but faster. Then you have to be able to repeat it faster and multiply it.
That's beautiful.
That's how we get to 100x.
I like the breakdowns, and I think this is so helpful to figure out the mindset and to make it simple for founders. We have founders here at Startups.com that definitely need to go 10x their 10K so that they break out of just being linear.
Yep.
But I'm going to conclude that here and let everybody know this has been part of our Revenue Accelerator track. And it's all about your first 10K, next 10K, and 10x your 10K. We've recorded content. If you haven't seen it, ask us for the other tracks. And we've broken everything down. Not all of our founders are going to be at that 10x. That's where I want to invite all of you. Go talk to Ryan. If anything, this has been hearing from Ryan, the way that he thinks about it, and to get your head into the game and take those micro steps and stack those wins up, because that's how you're going to get there. And that's what we're all about here at Startups.com. So Ryan, the last word to you. What's your final invitation for what founders should do after watching this video?
So start to contextualize this to your own situation, right? So figure out where you are in that overall hierarchy. Are we working towards the first 10K? Are we working towards the next 10K? Are we working towards 10xing 10K? Again, 10K being a placeholder for purposes of illustration, not necessarily relative to your revenue. Figure out where you're at in the overall process, and then figure out what's keeping you from getting to that next milestone, whether that's you're at 0 and you're trying to get to the first 10K, whether you're at 10K and you're trying to figure out how to get the next one faster, or whether you're trying to figure out how to duplicate those systems now to get to 10x or 10K, and then show up on Monday or Friday in the Getting Customers workshop and throw it at me. And we will take the context that you have applied to this framework, and we will work together to figure out exactly how to apply it and how to get you unstuck.
That's it for us today, Wednesday, Traction Hacking, Revenue Accelerator. We invite you to join us Tuesdays for pitch decks, Thursdays for Q&A. This has been great. Great questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Yes.
If you're watching this on YouTube, do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe, share with Founder, and we appreciate your feedback. Ryan, always a pleasure. I'll see you next week.